Good morning. Today is 20 June, the year 2007. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today, I'm here at the lovely home of Jim and Margie Allen in Redlands, California, along with fellow volunteer Bob Andrade. And today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Mr. Jim Allen. Madison, Missouri.
It's a north central part of Missouri.
Okay. And what was the population at that time and what is it now, do you think?
Oh, I have no answer for that.
Okay. Did you live there very long?
Oh, I left there when I was about 7 years old.
Oh, you did. Okay. And
we should have shut him off.
Did you bring him from Madison, Missouri along with you?
No, I didn't. No. There wasn't much left Madison, Missouri with me.
What was your father's name?
Carl Equilla Allen.
And how did he end up in Missouri? Where did his ancestors all come from?
Well, he was born in Bath, Illinois.
Okay.
And he come to Missouri as a young man. Why, I don't know.
And do you know what kind of work that he did?
He was a farmer.
Farmer. So you lived on a farm those first 7 years?
I was born on a farm.
Oh. How far outside the town was that?
Oh, it was at least 6 to 8 miles.
And how many acres did you have?
Possibly 120 to 160 acres. That was usually for one man. That was a big job for him.
Yeah.
Most of it was pasture.
Was it? Did you have livestock?
Oh yes, we had a team of horses, and the riding horse, and the horse pulled the buggy, and a few pigs and a cow or two.
Did you raise crops too?
Oh yes, he raised corn. He raised the potatoes we ate in the garden.
Yeah. And your mother, what was her name and her maiden name?
Viola Edna Bennett Allen.
And where did her ancestors come from? How did she end up there?
Well, her father was born in Warren County, Ohio. And my grandmother was born in Kentucky, around Louisville.
Uh-huh. Kind of I'm from southern Indiana, so I kind of know that area. And where did they meet, your mom and dad?
Well, my mom and dad? Well, they met in probably Monroe County, Missouri. That's where my grandfather's farm was.
I see.
That's where he went courting with his buggy and horse.
And was your dad in the service, like in World War I or anything like that?
No. My grandfather, he had 8 children, 5 daughters and 3 sons. And not a one of them was in the military. They were all farmers. And of course my dad, being a farmer, was excused the first time. And the second time I excused him. And by the next time, I guess the war was over. And he never lost they wasn't a son-in-law, and he never lost a grandson in World War II, or grandson-in-law, and he had 22.
Oh my gosh. that was amazing. Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had 2 brothers and a sister.
And what were their names?
W. Woodrow and Hazel Carleen and Billy Arnold.
And are any of them still living?
Do what?
Are they still? Do they still live? Do any of them live around here?
No, my sister and an older brother passed away.
And your younger brother is still?
My younger brother still lives in Laguna Woods. He retired from the Edison Company.
Oh, okay. And when you were about 7 years old, you moved, you said. Where did you move to, your family?
Well, in that case, I was kidnapped by my father, and he took me to Illinois, Mattoon, Illinois.
Your mother and father separated then?
Oh, yeah, she left him, I guess.
Oh,
She left him on the farm.
I see. And so you went to Mattoon, Illinois. Now, whereabouts is Mattoon? What part of
Well,
the state?
If you know where Decatur is, it's 40 miles southeast of Decatur, Illinois.
Okay. Well, I know of Decatur. I'm from Evansville, Indiana, and Evansville was in the 3I League when I was growing up, and Decatur had a team there. So
Mattoon's just west of Terre Haute over on the Wabash River.
Yeah, I've been there. I know where Terre Haute is. So did you stay in Mattoon for quite a long time?
Well, my dad had a job with the railroad. He happened to get that because his uncle worked there. And of course, when the stock market fell and the railroad started cutting their railroad business, why, they wanted my dad to take a cut in pay, and he was too proud to do that, and he wouldn't do it, so they just let him go. I think it proved out it was a bad mistake. Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, why,
What railroad was he with?
Illinois Central.
Oh yeah, I remember that. So tell me, what was growing up like for you during the Depression?
Well, he was going to California, and I remember the Model T. He gave $20 for it. That seemed to be the standard price for a long time for Model Ts. And he loaded up everything in a box, a big box, and put it on the back end of it. Me and my brother rode back there, and mother and sister and younger brother rode in front with him, and we took off, and we forded the Illinois River. There's no bridge across it in Illinois at that time. And we crossed the Mississippi at the Wabash track north of Hannibal, between Hannibal and Quincy. And as we was going down the road on State Highway 24, which was a dirt road, and he went out and turned off and went up to the town of Holiday. And now, I don't know why, but he did, and we were chugging along, and it wasn't as, roads weren't as smooth in those days as we're used to today. And so he was going along, and I remember when he fastened the bed on that darn thing, that he drove a bolt down through the frame, but he didn't put a nut on it. He didn't have a nut, so he just didn't put it on there. Well, anyway, the back end fell off. Me and my brother, we was left in the middle of the road as they went chugging down the road. And so consequently, we finally got up, and then of course it began to rain after we got loaded back up. And my grandfather and grandmother, my mother's folks, lived in Moberly, Missouri, and that's where we were headed. So we got to Moberly, and the grandparents weren't home. So my dad went around, he found a window unlocked and got inside, and we went inside the house. And of course, when my grandfather come home, why, he was mad at my dad anyway, so he threw him out. Mother and the kids stayed at Grandpa's for a few days, and then we loaded up and took off and going to pick strawberries in Arkansas and southern Missouri. Oh, I tell you, great life.
With your dad? You were still with your dad?
Oh yeah, that's
okay.
My dad and mother, see. He went back to Missouri and took her back to Illinois.
Oh, okay, so they got back together then?
Oh yeah, we was all leaving Mattoon, Illinois together as a family.
I see, oh, okay.
Headed for California.
About how old were you at that time?
Oh, I must have been about 12. No, I must have been about 10, headed towards 11.
Okay.
Because by the time we got done messing with the strawberries and we got out to Kansas to where an uncle and aunt, a great aunt and uncle lived, and we stopped in there. and they had the old homestead house available, and we moved into that. And the uncle managed to get my dad a job driving a team with a mowing machine, mowing weeds along the damn road. Very dusty job. So anyway, and then he helped, they repaired this separator that spring or before they started harvesting. So anyway, that was a hot, dusty job, and I can feel for my father now, but I didn't think much of it when I was 11 years old, because he come home from work one afternoon, and I know how he felt now. And I was supposed to be watering the horses or something, the team at the water tank, and he come out there. I don't know, I was barefooted and standing in some water, and I wasn't doing what he thought, and he almost booted me in the hind end with the back of the side of his shoe and raised me up out of the mud. And that's when my mother and him got into it, and so she sicked me off over to my uncle to get him to come over to the house. Now this is nightfall, and I went out across the 360 acres to get over there barefooted. So I found my uncle over there at his house, and so he loaded me up, and I told him what had happened, and he loaded me up in his car, and he took me over to, it was his folks' homestead house. His folks come there and homesteaded that 360 acres. So my mother, sister, younger brother, of course my mother, I think, was carrying my younger brother and my older brother. Here they was walking up that dusty road. So we all loaded in my uncle's car. He took us up to Wichita to the train depot and purchased us a ticket to Moberly, to her dad's. That was a good experience for me. I was not, well, I was a little over 11 years old, not much. And we got off the train in Kansas City to change trains. And of course I had to urinate, so my mother was going to take me into the ladies' restroom. Well, the old sister was dressed there in a blue uniform, didn't want me in there because I was too old. And of course my mother, she wasn't about to let me go to the men's room by myself, you know. Oh, they went around and around. The woman finally let me go in there. Fortunately, I didn't harm anything, so we got out of the depot and went on down to Madison, or Moberly. And so we got there, my grandfather and grandmother, they let us come in. And my grandfather, he had a big long table with 2 wooden benches on each side of it. And I had a cousin and 2 cousins there, a boy and a girl. And my uncle was there, my mother's brother. He was separated too. And I don't know, the table was full. There was a group of people there. And I happened to be down there by Grandpa Bennett, and I guess he knew what he was doing, because I don't know, my mother said something and I sassed her or something, you know. He got a handful of hair, and I can still feel him on that hair pull, boy. I tell you what, he got his knuckles just like a camshaft. And he looked me in the eye, and he just kept slowly twisting me. He told me that I'd never do that again. I didn't until I was senior in high school, and then my mother grabbed my head, and it still shows up in x-rays that she popped something in my neck. Oh yeah. No, I found that out over at a chiropractor's. He was x-raying me, and she knocked something loose there.
Now, I meant to ask you, now, all this moving around, traveling around, were you going to school? Were you able to?
Well, whenever we was there long enough. So, my grandfather, after, well, he tamed them all down real quick. Now, he was brought up with the children were to be seen and not heard, and only speak when spoken to. Well, now, at the time, I thought that was terrible. But as I've gotten older, got a little more knowledge and what have you, they was actually doing, the old people was actually only doing a favor to the children. And because, you know, the Japanese people, they have old men that walk down the roads, and they're storytellers, and they stop in at the different farmhouses and talk and tell stories to the children. Well, now that was a very good thing for us children in Missouri at that time. In the wintertime, you had the big heating stoves or fireplaces, and the children would sit down around those and be quiet. And they'd hear the old farmers talking and one thing and another. You learn a lot. Today, they watch that idiot thing. And there ain't nothing on that comes out that's very good, I don't think. I don't think much of it. Maybe the young people do. But they'll survive and carry on, because I think as much as the younger children today as my grandfather thought of us, and yet we went to World War II and all of his grandchildren done a pretty good job for him. So that's what'll happen to these young children today. They've sure got a lot of improvements to do, but I'm thinking that possibly when the chips are down, they'll perform the same as us fellas did in World War II.
I think you're right. I think so. I believe
I
that.
certainly hope so.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah.
But that's the big trouble today. The parents has not put any discipline in their children whatsoever.
Yeah.
So consequently, why should they ever do anything when they get older if they don't want to? They have never done nothing that way.
Yeah.
We had an experience of that right here in this mother's room, dining room right over here. There was a couple that lives here. They had 2 sons, I think. And one of them got mad at the soup kettle station, and he threw the soup bowl full of soup down, at least 40 feet down towards a row of people on each side of a table, and that bowl went right down between the whole bunch, and it hit my wife on the arm here and skinned it. And as you can see, she's nothing but a bunch of bones with a little hide on top of her. And I do think that if she'd have had a regular arm on her, they'd have probably broke her arm. Because I think it hit that hard bone. She does have good bones. It hit that hard bone and just peeled the hide off and went on down.
Now, when with your grandparents, did you stay there for quite a long time?
Oh, that's a long story. My grandfather had a sawmill, and he'd go out and buy 80 acres of timber or whatever there was. Then he'd get his old sawmill and steam engine up there, and they'd saw it up there, the railroad ties and crossing timbers and what have you. They'd work like heck in spring and summer. And that's what was happening then. He had a very good stand of timber that summer, and he had a big wad in his pocket of money. He even went to Hannibal, and he was up there and bought a brand new 6-cylinder Hupmobile with a spare tire on each fender. And we took off from Moberly for California in the fall. Oh, I'd been to school a month or 2 or so. And so we was 11 days in that car getting to California. And he got hit by an old car down in Fort Worth, Texas. And I'd been in the rear door and what have you. And last time I seen that car, that door had never been repaired.
So how many of you were in the car on that trip?
Okay, there was Grandma and Grandpa, my younger brother, my mother, myself, my older brother, sister, and a girl cousin. Oh, it was full. We had plenty up on top of the 2 and the trunk on the back. And, Oh, he had a sideboard on a bumper on a, what'd they call it, running board.
Running board. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah, and they had a bunch
So
of.
your parents are separated again, or your mom and dad separated at this
Oh,
time?
yeah,
again?
that was separated out in Kansas that summer, see,
Okay. All
or
right,
fall.
Yeah, okay.
And, yeah.
Where did you end up in California? Where did you go to in California?
Well, as we come through at Yuma, Arizona, they had the inspection station. And they had just gotten over the foot and mouth disease here. We didn't have to go through the pool of water with the car. They had got over that. But they was inspecting for insects and what have you. My grandmother had brought some quart jars of jelly or honey, and they wouldn't let that go on. That had to stay down in Yuma. And that's when I seen the first oil tanker with 21 tires on it. An old Mack truck with a chain drive. Of course, we got out across the desert. Why, you could see part of the old plank road off the side of the road ever so often. I had a couple of uncles that traveled that road in 21 to California.
They were truck drivers or what?
Oh, no, they just had a touring topmobile
they
to come
just,
out in.
oh, I see.
And there was one uncle of mine had the hired hand and his son in a two-door or touring hupmobile that was ahead of us all the way. That's the uncle that had gone over one of the uncles went over the plank road. So, and I can remember it took us 11 days to get to Atwater.
Where's that? Where's that one?
That's up in the Modesto area, Merced Modesto area. I don't know, it's long in there on 99.
Yeah, and that's where you were planning on going, or your grandfather?
No,
wanted
that's
to
where
go?
my grandfather was planning on
But
going.
why was he going there?
He had a son there that had a little farm, and he was a carpenter working in that area. And he had 20 acres, I think he had, in alfalfa, and he had a big high pile of hay and some cows, and he's selling milk. We stayed there a few days, and then we went on north to Chico. And I think they come out there that time for this uncle that was in the hupmobile. Now, the one we stopped to see in Atwater, it was him and the one that was in the hupmobile that come on the plank road in 21 to Southern California. They lived in Rosemead at that time. And my uncle told me that had a sawmill, Arthur, that if you didn't he lived in Rosemead at that time when he was out here. And he said if you didn't get out of Los Angeles at 3 o'clock, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not going to get out for a long time. Now, fellas, that's getting to Rosemead in 1921. Well, I got down there in 33, and I know a little about it. From then on, it was no different. And it's not no different today. Yes, sir. I went through that story. Well, anyway, every time we stopped, I went to school. So I went to school in Atwater with my cousin. And I thought California was a great place to go to school because, boy, they furnished us pencil and paper and pens to write with. And they furnished the paper and the books and the whole thing. Well, man, they'd bought it. We'd bought all that stuff as a kid when I was in Illinois and Missouri. So I thought California was a real place. And so I went to school in Atwater there with my cousin. Then my granddaddy wanted to go on up to Chico. Now this son of his that was with him, he was talking about the gravel business in Chico. Well, we went up there and him and I guess my uncle, they looked at the gravel business and moved around a lot. And I went to school. And in the springtime, why, just like I guess the birds and the bees and the flowers and what have you, Missouri was calling. So they lighted it up one of them old Model T trucks in the 1930 era, about a 27 or 6, I imagine. Had a Ruxel axle in it. That Hupmobile was loaded down, and I don't know, they had bought stuff here in California, and they loaded it on that Model T truck, and off we went. And that uncle of mine, he pushed that low pedal down all the way up them mountains out of Redding over to Susanville. He went slow uphill, but boy, when he went up downhill, I tell you, everything back down the road because he was going. And we ended up in Susanville, Reno, and then he went on east, and we went up through the sagebrush and what have you up to Burley, Idaho. Well, by the time he got to Burley, Idaho, he had to change the bands in the reverse and brake and what have you. Cold, oh, I watched him. That was my experience with a Model T and their bands. I seen that operation. So when I got a Model T, why, I knew a little bit about what to do to fix the bands. It was, oh, what a job. Well, anyway, after we got the truck repaired and what have you, took off for Missouri again. And we stayed in a motel. They called them cabins in those days, not motel. And that's all they were, a little one-room cabin. Have a hot plate in it. Maybe there was a toilet if it was a first-class job. Most of them was outside. So we got back to Missouri, St. Joe. I never will forget that. My granddad, that was getting close to Hannibal, and that's where he was headed. And I mean, we took off from St. Joe, and he'd always drove very sensible, you know. Boy, he wasn't a slowpoke, but boy, when he left St. Joe that morning, why, that was a paved highway, 36 in those days. Boy, he took off down through there, and I mean, we took off for Hannibal in a big way. Well, the tires in those days with a pretty good load on them, they didn't seem to like that. So I forget where it was, but somewhere about in the central part of Missouri there. Boy, one of them old rear tires went boom. He kept her in the road though. He had plenty of tires, you know, so we just took one off and put it on the back end. We took off again for Hannibal, and we didn't go no slower either. We got to Hannibal by noon. So then he had a daughter and son-in-law there, so. Oakwood's where we lit up with him. Well, I don't know, it could have been Hannibal, I don't know. We had a daughter in Hannibal and another daughter in Oakwood. Well, one of those places we stopped. And then he got a day or two, he rented a place on Lindell Avenue in Hannibal, 2-story house, a great big building that was a store or a church, but they put doors on it for a garage and a ramp up to it. Had a wood shed and what, oh, we was really in real fine housing there. Well, he found his timber out south of Hannibal, and I don't know, he sent his son off to get his sawmill and steam engine. They brought it up there and set it up, and he got a hold of the old man that hauled his logs in for him, and they started sawing ties, just like the summer before. And by fall, timber's all sawed up, and wasn't nothing to do, so off to California we come again. Meantime, I was going to school in Hannibal. Oh yeah, I had a 3-foot pair of stilts, and I'd walked in a parade in Hannibal.
Yeah. Is it Hannibal where Mark Twain was from?
Oh,
Samuel
that's
Clemens?
it. Oh, that's it. Oh yeah.
He was pretty famous there, I would think.
Oh yeah, he was, but I never did see Tom Sawyer's at that time, or the cave or anything. Yeah. But that fall we come back to California. Well, my uncle had bought a sawmill in north of Chico, up to Humboldt Ridge, 31 miles or 33 miles. And that cousin of mine, he used to come down in 30 minutes on that mountain road, 31 Chevy. Sedan. He knew all those curbs, and his father was the same way. They went up and down that mountain, boy, they got to know every curve, and they knew just how fast they could go around each one. If anyone else had been on their side of the road, there'd have been a big pile up. So he sawed the timber up there, and he was, we got up there, his son was complaining he couldn't find anybody that could keep up steam in his boiler. He had too big an engine for the boiler is what he had, and he's trying to take it as if he had a big boiler. And my grandfather told me, he says, James can keep up steam for you, because I'd fire his steam engine, old traction steam engine in Missouri. And he'd taught me all the tricks about it. And, man, the sun was hot. And he had no shade over the fire or anything like that. He was just out in the sun, just flying with slab wood. And he was standing there, he was my cheering section. We got him asleep. My granddad was the cheering section. He stood over and handled the water problem. I didn't have to worry about water in the boiler. And of course, the lower you keep the water level, the easier it is to keep up steam. If you've got a lot of water above the crown sheet, it takes more heat. So he would keep that water only about a ½ inch, and that's dangerous, because the least little thing, you can't hardly pull the fire out fast enough before the sucker will blow up. But and the injector that was on there, that's with as hot as everything was, boy, it was tricky as heck. But my granddad, he understood that all, and he fooled with it, and he always kept that water right there. And man, I kept up steam for that uncle of mine. And hey, I was only 12 years old. Hot? Ooh, it was hot. Man, I shoveled a lot of wood in that thing that afternoon. Well, we was there until spring. No, that's when my mother stayed out there then. So, Granddad took off from Missouri. My mother, she'd rented a house, and there was a professor at Chico State that she did laundry for. And he was a touchy sucker with his white shirts and the way they were ironed. One little wrinkle, if he seen it, he'd throw it back in the laundry to be laundried again and ironed. He wasn't mean about it, but that's what they wanted. That's what he wanted. And they'd promised to take her with him when he went back to Germany following summer or something. Well, anyway, spring, off to Missouri we went again. No, we stayed there this time. I'm forgetting about when or where I am. Yeah, my mother rented this house there from an undertaker. And it was on a corner. And of course there was some old dead cottonwood trees alongside of it. I didn't like them, they might have fallen in the house. So my older brother and I was at that time maybe 12 years old. He was 10. So we cut them down. And all the neighbors was all excited about it, you know, that we didn't know what we was doing, you know, and all that. So, well, when I was 12 years old, 13, 14, I'd tell you, there wasn't a whole lot I hadn't done.
Were you pretty big for a kid?
Huh?
Were you pretty big for your age? Pretty large?
No, I was just an average.
Average.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I did a man's work though, lots of times. My uncle up there, one summer I remember, they caught the guy that's helping my cousin with his Caterpillar tractor logging. That sucker, he didn't want to come in and have his dinner. He wanted to have his dinner out there so he could steal gasoline out of the Caterpillar. They fired him and I took his place. And that cousin of mine and he's about a year or two older than me, we supplied the logs just like this grown man did down at the mill. We got the logs down there.
Where did you go to high school?
I started in Chico. I went to Alhambra, went to El Monte, and I went to Downey.
So you moved from Chico down here to LA, Los
Well,
Angeles
yeah, my
area?
uncle did. So he loaded up my mother's stuff and brought her down here. And I got news for you. She was on the county welfare at that time. Now this was, in the 30s. And I got news for you, Buster. If they would have this welfare like it was in the 30s in Los Angeles County, they wouldn't have people coming up from Mexico to do this farm work, because they wouldn't be getting food stamps and what have you. They'd want to do better, and that's the way it was. Now, after my experience in the Japanese prison camp and one thing and another, what they were offering in the welfare, keep body together. But it sure encouraged you to want to do something better. That was the whole story. Oh, I never will forget. They call them commodities. Oh, brother. So when I got to Japan or China, I ate that stuff. I was back on commodities. Of course, sometimes I think the rice was better.
Did you play any sports in high school when you were in high school?
Well, I practiced a little football in my junior year. In my junior year in Downey, I was on the team. I was in, and that was my only experience in sports. I played a little baseball, but I wasn't very good at it. And football, the poor old coach, in the spring, he figured that fall was his last year as a coach for football because he didn't have anyone to play. He asked me if I was coming out, and I told him I would. I went out. And I remember he sat down on the bench in phys ed one time, and he explained to me, he said, you know, Jim, he says, it's not so much brawn and strength, you gotta use your head. Well, I only weighed 150 pounds, you know. And so that's what I did. And then on top of it, I had him tape my back up because I had sprained it. And he gave me a leather pad thing to strap around me. And he didn't insist that I do any tackling. So I used my hands up on their shoulders.
Oh.
And my wife's cousin, he was fullback. He played in back of me. And I managed to get all the guys down before that was running to guard the runner, so that all he had to do was tackle the guy. He used to get so mad because I didn't tackle him. He done all the tackling.
You took out the interference. So your wife, did you know her when you were in high school?
No.
Oh.
Of course, Downey that year, that was the first year they won a championship, was with us. 19 men. That's all we had. I was 19 men. Or boys.
Yeah. So what year did you graduate from high school?
Well, I was a single graduate in 1937 at Downey High School. There was no program for me. I just went on back to Missouri. I was back there in 1938 on a stern wheel steamboat on the Missouri River, and I decided I ought to get my diploma. So I wrote Downey High School, and they sent me a 1938 diploma. That's when I graduated. Yeah.
And were you getting into carpentry work that time when you're
No.
What were you? Yeah. Okay.
No, I had before I got on that steamboat.
You were working on the steamboat?
Just a minute. First, though, I was helping dig holes for rural electrification, Rawls County, Missouri. 35 cents an hour, 40 hours a week. They took out 2 cents for Social Security a week. You don't think we ain't went to hell in a handbasket? I worked there through the fall, and that was as hard a job as I think I ever had. I never worked as hard in prison camp as I worked there, but then I was pretty fortunate in prison camp. But I worked on that, and when the ground froze, they was terrible then to dig a hole because the wind was blowing, it was cold, and the dirt would be moist down in the hole, and you get it up in the air and it'd freeze on it. It was just a miserable job, but what else was you gonna do? Before that though, Clemenson's field in Hannibal, well, they was building a limestone wall around that. It was a baseball field, and they were wanting stone masons. So I become a stone mason. I went down and bought a trowel and a stone axe or hammer, and my grandfather, we picked out a piece of hickory that he said would make me a good handle for it. We made a handle for it, and I went to work as a stone mason. I still got the piece of paper saying that I was a stone mason. Well, now they could hire me because I was single, and I didn't have any dependents. The PWA was doing this job, or paying, the government was paying it, see. It was WPA and PWA. Well, WPA, everybody was on welfare, I guess you'd call it. But PWA, they could hire skilled employees there. So being as I was a stonemason, they could hire me. And the wages was pretty daggone good. Well, they started you out way down in the hole in the foundation. And if you got to where they thought you was kind of placing them stones pretty good, why, they'd let you come on up out of the ground and get above ground with it. So I was there 2 weeks, but before I left, I had worked up above ground. And I forget now what I was earning, but I got news for you. I had spending money for a long time from that 2 weeks. Now, then, let's see, after that is when my grandfather went to Kansas, and I'd made the wheat harvest out there at this uncle of mine that when my mother and father separated. And I helped him thrash his wheat, and he run the elevator in town there, so his son and my cousin, we was the hard hands at the elevator, unloading trucks and starting the elevator motor in the morning. Old Fairbanks said, put, two great big flywheels. And of course, there was so many pounds of wheat went in each boxcar that come up there. And the automobile cars, they didn't carry any weight at all. So you didn't put much wheat in them. So you never had to get in there. You just had to nail the doors shut and forget it. But those old timers, little bitty doggone things, they'd have an awful load on them. And boy, that uncle of mine, he wanted to get every pound in there that they would haul to Kansas City. And they was so small that, boy, that wheat would get in there, and you'd have to get back in there and shovel that wheat to the far end of each end of that boxcar to get all that damn wheat in there. That was terrible with that dust and what have you. Oh, we slept out between the grain elevator hallway, my cousin and I did at night, about the coolest place you could get. And in the morning when I'd wake up, I'd have to take my fingers and bust open my eyes. That dust would batter your eyes tight. So I always wanted a motorcycle, and a cousin of mine, he'd take me into town, and there was an Indian motorcycle in there. They wanted $80 for it. Well, by the time the summer was over with, I had $80 in my pocket, but I wouldn't buy that damn motorcycle. So I got on a bus and went back to Missouri. Well, let's see. Then that winter, why, a cousin of mine, she married the son of the captain of the John James. a stern wheel steamboat. It was a contractor's workboat. And she married the captain's son. So two other of my cousins worked on that thing down at the Saverton Dam. It hauled aggregate down from Quincy Avenue for the dam. And boy, they was wild in those days as they are today, you know what I mean, overloading and what have you. Those cousins of mine telling me they'd laid those steel barges would draw 7 foot of water. And they'd load those things, and this old boat brought 2 of them down. And they'd load them down to where that they said they'd get their feet wet walking along the side. The water was above the damn top of the barge. And that old boat would bring 2 of them down for the dam. Well, before he'd get to the dam, he'd blow his whistle. And all the little work boats, whatever they were down there, they was to quit right down to whatever they was doing and get downstream, so that when that old boat got down there, turned around and wanted to come up and back of the dam, all them other boats tied on and helped him. He'd went to St. Louis. So you see, they're crazy all the time. This ain't nothing new. Trucks overloaded and what have you. And that darn boat went under a couple of bridges plus the Wabash Bridge. And if that captain had stubbed his toe any way, and those barges had hit those piers of the bridges, they'd have come down. That's all that could have happened. Because I don't know how many tons they was on those barges, but 7 foot deep, and they were quite long. Oh yeah, boy, I tell you. Now, then I got to working on that thing, and my cousin got me that job there because I knew about steam. I could fire boilers, and I got a job as watchman, night watchman. Well, that was quite an experience. The cook was the captain's wife, and I wasn't used to just throwing food away. So at night I'd open up a can of peaches or apricots or something, number 2 can, you know. And of course I couldn't eat the whole thing. And I'd put it in a bowl and put it back in her refrigerator, and boy, she chewed my ass out something awful about that one morning. I thought, well, that's easy. After that, I'd have my apricots or peaches, and then I'd just take and throw the can overboard. There's many a times when I was in prison camp, I'd like to have had those cans that I threw overboard. So, we used to have to walk out across the cornfield bottoms there on the Missouri River to get drinking water. 2 buckets, 1 in each hand. And I didn't like that at all. I really didn't like that doggone job. I got to be deckhand. And then I got to be the number 1 deckhand. And they hired some guy that had been working on a little workboat with 3/4 rope lines, hemp lines. And of course he could take and throw them on his chalks or his timber heads, and he could freeze on them. Well, the little old motorboat he had, that power boat, they'd just pull it around. It wouldn't break the line. Well, it wasn't that way on this old stern wheel boat where we had 1.5 inch hemp lines. And we was coming up river and the ice was running. We was below Kansas City at Liberty, Missouri. No, it was above Liberty, Missouri. It was by the Standard Oil Refinery. And we had to make a crossing on the river. And, well, the ice was so much it just pushed the boat, barges, and everything right up against the bank. Well, the old captain, he decided that he had to get out of there because it'd eat up the boat. Oh. So, what we were to do, he tied up, let's see. Oh, he backed up. We backed up and put one barge, had two barges, two big steel barges, put one behind a bunch of piling down at Liberty, Missouri. Then he come back upriver with the idea that he was gonna ram that thing up through there. Well, he tried to, but he didn't have no luck. That took us right into the bank again. Then he told us to slack off on the shoreline, tighten up on the other side with the steam capstan. Then we'd get that bow out and the rice would take it away. So that's what happened. Well, naturally, the barge will want to come back the other way. Well, when it did and it bounced, that deckhand, he froze on the damn line. And he busted one of the 3 hemp ropes. That old captain ought to swore he was gonna come right out over the wheel in that boat. Oh, he yelled. And of course I was pleading with that other guy how to do to slack off, slack off, slack off. We managed to bounce that damn barge back and forth and get him headed upstream. Then we got another line on that barge, but oh, that was awful. Well, we got up there, and then we was going to go to Shreveport, Louisiana, and we started downriver, and the ice was running, and with the ice running, the depth of the river was getting shallower and shallower, and he was pushing that old boat right on down the line. And I got to steer that thing a time or two, and I did on that one. And so I decided when we got to, I was going to be a farmer at that time, my granddad's farm. Mother had made him for a loan from the federal government. So, I don't know, I was getting mad because I was getting further from the farm all the time. And Shreveport, Louisiana was a long ways from it. And I was mad at the cook anyway about water and all of this. So I throwed a lot of coal in that old boiler. And man, when we come down the river for Boonesville, they could have seen us for 50 miles. I had the 2 smokestacks, smoke just rolling out of it, man. I mean, and when we got to Booneville, that boiler popped off, and I don't know how long it popped off. I didn't care. I didn't care what the captain thought either, because I was leaving it that night. So after supper, I loaded up my suitcase with my clothes and what have you, and we went uptown. The other guy at deckhands, they took stuff back to the boat, and I got on a bus and went to Missouri, or to the farm. And then the government, they like to never wanted to approve the loan. I got tired and I decided, well, I'm going back to California. I had $20. My mother had $80 I'd brought home. We took 20 of it and bought a 29 Model A 2-door sedan. No front bumper. Oh, it was a pile of junk, Buster. $20. I put a 98 cent set of Western Auto rings in it. Put an oak 2x4 for a bumper. I loaded that thing down and I had 2 mattresses on top. So we headed for California. My mother, my younger brother, and my sister. Well, it was only good for about 30 miles an hour. That's all that drives, see. And we took off. And we made it down to Enid, Oklahoma the first day. Started early. And the sucker was wanting to run hot. And I knew I didn't want no hot running car going out across that damn desert and what have you, so I pulled in the garage there. The man agreed to put a new radiator on it for $12. So I blew $12 there. Boy, it sure paid, 'cause Never got hot at all the way across there, just chug, 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 not fast, but every morning, afternoon, middle, had to take and stop and tighten up the bearings in the front wheel. And couldn't steer it, it was wobbling. Oh, I had two 2.5 gallon cans of oil on it, hanging up on the side of the radiator. And I had to put oil in it quite frequently. We got down to not Albuquerque, but Alamogordo. There was only one motel in that town, I think. My mother, we stopped outside, my mother went in, and we'd come through a dust storm. My mother went in there to see if they had a cabin for that night. Oh no, they was filled up. Oh, what down. She come back and I turned the key on, pushed on the starter button, and nothing, it wouldn't start. I thought, oh boy. So I raised the hood up and I looked at the situation inside there. Well, you know the Model A had them little copper strips down to the spark plugs? And with that thing burning all the oil it was burning, there's a lot of oil got up in there. And that dust settled in on those strips. Well, I didn't know what to do. So I seen there was the dirt on there, you know. So I took time out and wiped off the dust on the distributor and those strips and what have you. Got back in and helped my bread and turned it on and blup, 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 blup. Finally that night, I don't know, it must have been 11:30 or 12 o'clock before we finally found a place to stay. And oh my goodness, what a hell of a hole that was. Oh my goodness. Well, we got a little rest and it was early morning and we was out of there. I don't remember where in the world that was. We made it to Geely Bend, Arizona. And I decided, well, I was down to only 4 tires on the wheels on the car. So I went down to a garage down there and they had a retread tar and I bought that silly thing. And I put it on because I figured it was better surely than some of the others I had there. Boy, we didn't get too far down the road until that sucker blew. Then I was with 4 tires and we was getting damn low on money. So we slowly come to California from Geely, and we made it into El Monte. But I didn't have no more car trouble, and I think my mother had $5 left when we got to El Monte. And that's when I started in the carpenter trade. 2 days later, I had a job digging foundations by hand for houses. 50 cents an hour. That was a hell of a lot better than I was doing in Missouri. And I worked for that outfit for till the fall of the year. And there was an old carpenter working for them, and they had the idea that he wasn't moving fast enough. But the old man, he knew what he was doing. His tools was good. And he's doing a hell of a lot more work than some of them guys that's running loose. And he finally come out to see me one night. They fired him. He come out to see me one night. Told me he had a job for me for 55 cents an hour at a store fixture company in Los Angeles. Well, that was a nickel an hour more, so I went down there. I just went down there. I didn't have nothing to go back for where I was working. I went down there and went to work. You know, as you go along, if you listen, you'll learn. And we used to eat lunch and then stand outside there on Long Beach Boulevard where the shop was. There's an old boy come along there, one arm, selling pencils. And he was telling us that he had been in China flying with the Flying Tigers on the machine gun in the back. And he was telling about how much fun it was to take and shoot those Japanese officers when they was running on the ground. You could see them. Now that might not sound very exciting for you fellas right now. But when the war started on Wake Island, and that island started shaking, I started running away from from the building, and here come a bunch of Japanese bombers. And I happened to think about what that old boy told me. Hey, and you could see him up in the nose of the plane. I come to remember what that old boy said, and goddamn, I hit the coral right now, flat. You could look up in there as they went by, and you see them right in the. So you see, you learn a lot along the way, and when you're young, your mind thinks about it. You're getting tired, aren't you, Bob?
I'm just restless.
The carpentry. The old fella got your job
Oh,
with
yeah,
this
yeah.
this other
Okay.
group. So I kind of want to get a little bit about that, and then how you got the job over in Wake Island. So
Oh,
let's
okay.
let's get over to
Well,
there.
that was just the starting of it. So consequently, this building houses, that didn't last very long. And then this gentleman come and told me he could get me 5 cents an hour more. So I went down to work for the California Store Fixture Company. Well, I worked there a short period of time, and what happened was business fell off, so they didn't need my help, and there wasn't very much work at that time in 1940, and so I went and decided I'd join the Carpenters Union. So I went up to the business agent in El Monte, California, and signed up to be an apprentice carpenter. Well, I had a very, very good kit of tools, because the old man I worked with, he'd tell me what to buy, and he'd loan me that day, but I better go buy it that night because he wouldn't let me use it the next day. So I had a very, very good kit of tools, and this fella that I went out to work, he sent me out to do some work on a house in Monrovia, the business agent did, and then he sent another fellow, carpenter, out to the same job. Well, this old boy had been a foreman on a sewer plant in Chicago, Illinois, so he was a carpenter. He knew what he was doing. So anyway, the next meeting night of the Carpenters Union, the fellow I was working with, he was telling the business agent I shouldn't be joining as an apprentice, I should be a carpenter. And so they got a few more dollars out of me, and I made a journeyman carpenter that night. They were 2 of us fellows initiated. And I guess from then on after that, I guess they was initiating a lot of carpenters for these cantonments. So this happened to be on the January 9th. A buddy of mine, the carpenter that I went to school with at El Monte High, we got in my 36 Ford, and that was 39, there was a lot, or 40, there was a lot of rain. So I'd fixed this Ford of mine up so I could pull a canvas up over the radiator. It's 36 Ford, and I put an iron rod at the top of it so that I had a ring with a wire I could grab and pull it up if we hit any water. The rod would take it down so it'd stay cool. And we took off that night for Paso Robles, Camp Roberts. I'm going to tell you, up through Santa Barbara, we went for, oh, I don't know, it was pretty deep water for miles up there. And of course, I just pulled that canvas up, and we was the only ones going through. But then I was having it in low gear. The engine was running fast, so the exhaust muffler wouldn't fill up with water. We was shoving water above the headlights. 36 Ford. Well, we got to Camp Roberts, or Paso Robles, to the Union Hall that morning, about breakfast time. So we went in there, and we got our work orders to go out there to work. And we went out there, and that was a mud hole, oh my. So we stayed in camp that night out at the camp. They had a tent camp out there, and a tent mess hall and what have you. And we stayed out there. And I had a brand new pair of 16-inch lace-up boots that I'd bought just before I went up there. And the 2 weeks I was up there, I wore them out. walking on that gravel road every morning and night, and we're about for the Division 6. So I worked there, and we'd come home about every weekend. And so eventually I bought myself a 40 Ford down in Los Angeles one weekend. And the next weekend I come home, I went down and had them put a Columbia axle in it. And come to find out, somebody told me I wasn't trailing. My rear wheels wasn't trailing my front wheels. Well, the 41 Ford had a wider rear end, and they'd give me a 41 Columbia axle. So I went in there one Saturday morning and they changed it. And I went up and down there real fast. I had a nurse I was all excited about at the Huntington Hotel or Huntington Hospital in Pasadena. I had a date with her at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. We quit work at 3:30 at Paso Robles, and I was there at 8:30 that night. I don't think I didn't come down over the mountain and what have you, boy. that Columbia axle, boy, I mean, it is roll. And Memorial Day we left, finished Roberts. Well, made her feel. And you talk about hot. And that bunch I was working with up there, my buddy and I, we was stopping at a beer joint on the way home, having a beer, which was fine. But the trouble of it was, there was a bunch of them other guys we was working with out there. They all started wanting to come and stop there and have a beer. Well, this one wanted to buy the beer, and the other one, well, that was too much beer. So we quit that. And well, I was spending too much money up there on them diamond dances and just a good time, you know. So I left there. I just left there and went over to Richmond, and a friend over there, I didn't get a job, and then I went back to Los Angeles. And that's when I got the job to go up to Camp Roberts. No, before I got to Roberts, I went up to Fort Ord, and they had a lot of poison oak up there in the hills. And they was, the way the doctors was wanting you to have was eating in a tent, and tents we was living in. And I got that poison oak all over my legs and what have you. And the only way they was going to doctor that was just to wash it with, I think, Fell's naphtha soap and put on a clean pair of overalls every day. Well, now living in a tent, and, no way. So that didn't take me long. I just folded up and I went back to El Monte. And I got back down there, why I got a job I don't know whether you remember the big gas tank down by the post office annex, right on the banks of the Los Angeles River. Why, they were.
Did you?
You can see them for miles,
Did you
those
watch that?
tanks.
No, I'm looking at it.
There's natural gas.
Oh, the
Yeah,
lady
it floats
came
on
and got-
water. Do you know that?
Oh.
She already came and got.
I remember.
She already came and got.
Hey, you're
Ah.
talking about where I'm from.
Yeah.
I'm from, Rosemead was called La Mission Vieja, the old mission.
The what now?
Rosemead was called La Mission Vieja.
Oh, I see, okay.
My whole family's El Monte, Alhambra.
Oh, okay. I better be careful what I'm saying, man. Well, anyway, I got a job there, the superintendent on there. I'd worked for them up at Camp Roberts, Fort J. Twice. So they sent me down there, and they had just poured the foundation for that thing, and they was starting up, and there was gonna be 3 lifts. And, boy, there's a lot of steel in that thing, in that concrete. And there was a strip of copper 10 inches wide that had to be slipped down between the center of those walls. And that's when I made a big hit there. Boy, that first lift, they was trying to get that piece of copper down between that steel and the forms on the end. Oh, they had hydraulic jacks and all kinds of stuff. And on the forms that they had there to be put in there between all that steel, there was a 1x4, last piece on. And I had a couple of little C-clamps in my toolbox, so they had an extra sheet of that metal around there. So I just unrolled it and fastened it top and bottom with my C-clamps and got up on top and just shoved it right down all the way real quick, all by myself. Oh, you talk about a bunch of grown men. They sure looked up to a young man real quick right then. Oh yeah, I got an awful good letter from the assistant superintendent there down to that guy hiring people down in Los Angeles for PNAB at Wake. So they wanted 10 years experience before they'd hire you. Well, I don't know how many times I went down there arguing with that man and taking recommendations and what have you. And I don't know, I guess he finally got tired of me because he finally, can't you give me, say you had 10 years experience? I said, how can I do that when I'm only 23 years old? I said, I can't do it. And so he finally hired me. And so I loaded up and went on the Matsonian to Honolulu, USS Regulus to Wake Island. I got there
Go ahead.
I got there October 2nd, 1941 to Wake Island. I left there January 12th, 1941 as the guest of the Emperor Hirohito.
Now, did you know where Wake Island was? I mean, when you first heard about it, and why did you want to go there in the first place?
Well, I'll tell you, I had learned about Wake Island way back in geography in school. It was no surprise. I knew where it was. I'd read a little bit about it. And of course, I even tried to get out on those islands to work in 1940 even. But nobody wanted me because I didn't have the experience. But this guy, he finally broke down and hired me.
When you got there, how many of you guys went in there from?
About 1,200.
1,200.
Yeah. Oh, there was every kind of a tradesman there you wanted.
And you were supposed to do what when you got there?
Well, they put me, well, we all went down to carpenter's shop the next morning after breakfast, took our tools, and all the guys was kind of like a mating season. They was always wanting to partner up with somebody. Well, I didn't go for that. I just sit up there on the pile of lumber with my toolbox, and everybody got partnered up and left, but there's just two of us left. And one of them had been there on the island, and they'd sent him back to Honolulu for his eyes. And of course, the carpenter boss knew him, so I got to go with him and out to work on the Marine Corps barracks. And I got up on the scaffold, and he's down on the floor. And of course, everybody's come to by and is talking about Honolulu and what have you, and I just sitting up there on top of the scaffold. It's an easy job. He's doing all the work down there. I was doing a little nailing up at the top.
But what were you constructing? What was the idea of having all you guys
Oh, I
over
see
there?
what you're at. It was a naval air base. That's what it was. And in fact, they were building a building to repair torpedoes. They were dredging the lagoon out. Well, there's a dredge there working. And they had several shovels digging the entrance to the lagoon on Wilkes Island. They didn't even get that. Oh, they got it started pretty good. But you could still see where they were digging in '85 when I went out there.
Was the Pan Am building already there? Or
Oh yeah, now Pan Am did their building of their hotel in 1935. And when they had that typhoon across there in '35, the people got in the cold freezer and withstood the blow. Because it tore up, it broke 8-inch ironwood trees, that blow did across there. It really tore up things.
So the Pan Am Clipper, that was one of the stops in the
That's
Pacific
right, that
at
was
that
one
time?
of their stops.
Yeah.
And you see, they kept a little motorboat there all the time. Now, it's really what this motorboat's job was, if the lagoon was real smooth, no waves or anything in it, Clipper couldn't take off. So that motorboat's job was to get out there and make some waves on the lagoon enough to get that Clipper so he could get off. You know, the suction would hold him.
And how big was the island?
Well, including the lagoon, it was 2,500 acres.
And how many, they had Navy and Marine Corps personnel on, or Navy and Marine?
Well, there was about 3 Navy men there who were inspectors to see that the Navy was getting what they was supposed to. That's about all of the Navy men that I know of. Now, there was also some Army men there. They had a communication system there for PBYs that was ferrying through to the Indonesia, and B-17s going to the Philippines.
Was there any talk about maybe having trouble with the Japanese when you got there?
I don't ever remember any talk about it. I know that I remember the night that there was 2 ambassadors or what have you, Caruso and the other one, that stopped there on the Pan Am plane and
Oh, they
stayed
did?
all night.
Oh, I didn't know that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had the curtains down so they couldn't see what was going on.
Who?
We did it, we put curtains down so Japanese could not see what we were doing on the island, Crusoe. And,
Oh, where at it? You mean in Honolulu?
No, at Wake, when they refueled.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they had them, the curtains so they could not see the construction.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Well, I knew nothing about that.
yeah.
Of course, Devereaux went over and had dinner with him. So did Cunningham, who was the Navy commander. Now, there was more than 3 men there. There was 3 inspectors and the commander, Cunningham, was there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Devereaux was he a
Marine.
Marine, was he a general?
No, a major.
Major,
Major Devereaux.
right.
He was a Marine. He got an awful lot of credit for stuff.
Yeah.
And hell, he wasn't a commanding officer. There was a lot of bad, hard feelings over that deal. Yeah.
Okay. So, so the first couple months before December 7th or December 8th, what was, you were just working away and just,
Oh yeah, I worked 9 hours a day. We didn't work Sunday. We did the Sunday before the attack on Pearl Harbor, though, I believe.
now were there aircraft there also?
Well, there was 12 F-4Us arrived.
F4Fs?
Yeah,
Wildcats?
F-4S.
Yeah.
They even had to crank up their wheels.
Yeah.
on
I know, I
that
got
plane. Now let's see. They didn't get there but very short time before the war started. Now, I don't recall. I can't say the dates that they arrived.
But they were not there when you first got there?
Oh
They came
Lord, no!
later?
They didn't. They only got there a day or 2 before
I see.
the attack.
The 4th of December.
Oh, okay.
When was it?
4th of December.
Okay, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it wasn't very. Now we were supposed to do some practicing. I think I was training on the 5-inch guns with Lieutenant Barninger and all. And I think the Sunday before it happened in Pearl Harbor, we were to do some practicing or something, firing those guns and what.
Did they give them option to be involved or not be involved, did they?
What?
The construction workers, did they give the option to be involved or not
Well,
be involved?
this is before Pearl Harbor. He's
Yeah, I
talking
know.
about- oh.
Yeah, well, they asked for volunteers. The Marines did. They had a whole lot more equipment than they had manpower. And they asked for civilians who would volunteer. And they'd pick you up every Thursday night and front of your barracks and deliver you back.
Did most of the guys volunteer?
Well, no, not, there wasn't as many as you'd think, I don't think.
And what was the age range of you workers?
Oh, I'd say it's from, well, now they was guys there who were 17 years old, CC boys, laborers.
Yeah.
The lieutenant at the CC camp up in Boise, Idaho, above north of Boise, as these CC boys would finish their time, he'd take them down and recommend them to Morse Newton. And of course they was young, and
Yeah.
most all of them signed up, you know, because the pay was, they was used to only $30 a month, and they could go out there. And believe it or not, there was one of them CC boys out there that was a cat skinner. And he was as good a cat bulldozer man as they had on the island. Yeah, W.G. Pennington.
And were there some older fellows too, or how old would be some of them?
Oh, hell, from Methuselah back. Well, now, my buddy a carpenter, he's a World War I vet. He celebrated his 50th birthday in Musang, China. Now, there was a Dutch Raspy. No, Dutch Raspy, oh, that was, oh, I should never think of that name. But nevertheless, oh, there was one old boy that was an American Legion man. He was in World War I. And he was down at the beach and during the invasion throwing hand grenades into the landing boats of the Japanese. Oh, yeah. I can't think of his name now. He tried to escape and he didn't even get out of the camp up at Pingtai, China.
Tell me about when you first heard about Pearl Harbor, about the attack.
Well, I was working out at on the mess hall, Marine Corps mess hall, and there was word come out that they was been bombed there, and the Marines, they started coming by with their steel helmets on their back and motorcycles and trucks going up and down the road real fast, and the Clipper took off that morning for Guam. And I don't know, it was an hour or so later, why, it come back. It was dumping gasoline on the north part of the island, getting rid of the gasoline, and they come down and landed on the lagoon. And it was tied up at the dock at noon when the Japanese planes dropped their bombs. And I think there was 2 bullet holes in the Clipper. I think that's what the word was out.
Did you have foxholes or something like that, Doug?
Oh, no. There wasn't a foxhole dug on that island when it started, no.
So what did you do when they started dropping bombs?
Well, I went out, the building started shaking and what have you, and we was getting ready to go to lunch. The semi-trailer with the benches on it was already out in front. So I went out in front, I went out the side door, down along and as I got out to the road, just outside the mess hall, the warehouse across the street started shaking. And of course you could hear the island was shaking. And pretty soon you seen planes coming our way, so I run out to the west of the building, and that's when I decided I'd listen to that old one-armed man telling pencils. I quit running, and I had been over close to the building, and I got a piece of shrapnel through the loin of my back, and so I seen them coming, and I wanted to get out from under them, and I couldn't possibly do that. So, as I say, I thought of that old boy, and I just hit the deck, and I could look right up and down real close.
Did you anticipate, when you heard about Pearl Harbor, did you anticipate them bombing you next? Or did,
No, I never anticipated that at all.
until you saw them?
No, not till I saw them, sure. But you knew that the Marines was getting ready for them.
Okay, so, And that was that like the next day when they came to bomb you guys, or how soon after?
Oh, no, no. It was around 8 o'clock in our
That very
time
same
when
day.
they was bombing Pearl Harbor,
I
but it
see.
was Sunday and it
Yeah.
was Monday where we were. And then at noon is when they hit us.
Yeah. And so, when did they hit you next then, or what?
Oh, the next day about 9 o'clock. Oh, and maybe 11 o'clock. That's the day they got the the warehouse where all the parts for the equipment on the island, the barracks that we had just built the Sunday before for the people flying through, and hospital. Yeah, that's when they got that.
Did many people get hurt or killed the first
Oh,
couple
yeah.
days?
Well, there was about 120 killed. Now, after that, they got a bunch of the Marines and people down at the airport that first time they went through. They wiped out that bunch of crew down there. But the Marines didn't have too many mechanics and stuff left to work on the planes. They used the guys from Wake Island. There was a few of them there that knew about it.
Do you remember about what Teeters did, moving the artillery with the Caterpillars? Remember they moved the artillery. You know, he would move them around after a raid.
Oh, yeah.
tell me about
Well,
that.
I was on the 3-inch anti-aircraft guns that was happening to. Oh, yeah. Well, each one of those gun batteries had a Caterpillar tractor to move them. I don't know if they had one or two or what, but they had at least one.
So, okay, you're on a 3-inch gun, did you say?
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about that. What was your job on
Well-
the gun? And how many guys were on the gun?
There's 8 Marines, if I remember correctly. And they didn't have anybody for the on the outside of the gun to pass ammunition. You see, they had holes, 4 holes with ammunition in the sandbags. And they didn't have any help to do that. So that's what us civilians volunteered to do. And we got 60 seconds boot camp on the second day. Old Gunnery Sergeant Crowley, he was in there bellering above the tackle of that gun, and he was a-telling and yelling and what have you. But I'll say one thing about it, he must have been satisfied with what us 5 civilians was doing, because I never seen him again. Because I was the man that handed the shell to the Marine on the deck, steel deck. There was 4 of them behind me that was, every time I'd hand one up there was one available for me. And they were pretty smooth work, because one time we got more than 60 shells up in the air in a minute. That's as long as they had to shoot. They're so high. And most of the time we get 57, 58, 59, but one time we went up into the 60s, 2 or 3. We really had a smooth running gun operation, and for some unknown reason it seemed as though that them Japanese bombers liked Gun 1. Because even the last day they bombed, so help me, they put 4 of those things right around Gun 1.
And what gun were you on?
1. Oh yeah, and yes. No, that last day they got 4 right around us, and there was one of them exploded above the ground. It put the gun out of commission. We was on our 3rd gun on Gun 1. All the rest of the guns never got any action at all. They never did have a replacement. But we was on our 3rd gun.
Wore the other ones out?
Yeah. Now, the first gun we had, a piece of shrapnel dug a chunk out of the slide. So they just put it off in the bushes down where we were at that time, and that's where the Japanese was coming ashore. And they was tough fellas down there, Marines and civilians, that was pushing shells out of that into that landing. That's where we moved the first time, is down in that area. Then the next time we moved, the next night is up on the lagoon. And we stayed there till it was over with.
Did you, were you firing at the landing parties too, at some point in time?
Yes, we fired one salvo out there. They lowered the barrel down as far as they could, and they put, I guess, got the readings on it, what they wanted, and the lieutenant told them to fire. But that's all that I can recall, that we fired one round down at the landing.
And as I recall, at least I know the first landing was repelled, was it not?
Oh, yes, well, no, we had nothing to do with that at all, on the first landing. We didn't do no firing or nothing.
But whoever it was, I mean, and inflicted substantial damage to the Japanese.
Well, that was the
landing.
5-inch guns.
Oh, okay.
That's the 5-inch guns that was doing all of that.
That's almost point blank then. I mean, there was no, remember they came in with 900 yards, then we let loose?
Well, I don't know how many yards or such as that, but seems as though I heard somebody say that Barninger, Lieutenant Barninger, now that's the battery down on Peel Point, that he bore-sighted the guns. I don't know.
Yeah.
They tell that story, I don't know.
Now, did anybody get hurt on your gun crew?
Well, Porky George was the man's name, and he happened to be laying on the gun platform, and that's the first night we moved, and we was short of sandbags that morning, and we didn't have at the entry, all we had was just the doorway. We didn't have the regular L shape, and the bombs, they started and they got to us, and some of them burst down where we was, and one of the fell fragments comes through and skinned Porky George on his stomach. Just drew the blood. That's all it was. All it was damaged on our guns.
Did you see casualties, guys dead or hurt bad?
No, I seen Japanese after I was captured. Oh, I seen a Japanese soldier around a gun that he had the whole side of his head blow out of skull. But you could see his brain, but he was still alive.
Oh.
And I was going out hollering for the Jap soldiers, for the Marines to surrender that they'd seen run through in the bush. And that's when I learned my first Japanese word. Oi, oi, oi. Now what would you do if somebody's hollering oi at you and you was walking away from them? Well, I didn't understand them either. I turned around and looked at them, and then I just kept on going. They kept doing this, so they got tired and they fired their rifles in the air. I got the message. I figured they wanted me to come to them. And that's what I say. Them damn Japanese soldiers was very, very disciplined, because they was told not to kill or shoot anyone, and you know, unless they'd been shot at and what have you.
Grandpa, are you doing okay?
Me doing okay?
Yeah, you're not getting too tired or anything?
No, no,
Are you
no,
kidding?
no,
Okay.
no,
Are
I'm
you
okay.
kidding?
He's
That's my
tired
granddaughter.
He's wearing
She come
that.
all the way down here from Seattle to protect me against you fellas.
That's right.
Well, then you say, now this is when the next attack you're talking about, right? Remember
Well,
the 23rd?
Okay, yeah.
I'm talking about the 23rd right now, when I seen the brains.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so tell me about that final attack then. The final attack when the Japanese overran the island. Or is this?
Well, I didn't, you see, I wasn't down where a lot of that was going on.
Okay.
The only thing I had to do with that was the time that the gun fired down there.
Okay.
That's the only thing I had on that.
So was it just about every day they came, the bombers
No,
came
it
over?
wasn't every day, but it was pretty
Quite
much
often.
so.
Yeah.
It was, well, let's put it this way, I remember this much, that there were 16 days that I was under attack.
Mm.
No, 16 days, that's how long the damn war started. Okay, there's 4 times that I was in the center of a bombing raid, let's put it that way. That's what I was wanting to say, I was getting mixed up with that 16 bit. No, it was 4 bombing raids that I was more or less, the bombs was around me.
During this time, did you have a feeling that you're going to be rescued, or that the cavalry's going to come in,
There was
or
always
did you?
scuttlebutt that there was a rescue bunch on the way and all. But then I'll tell you what, I'm happy that admiral was chicken, and he turned around, he just saved an aircraft carrier and a bunch of ships, that's what he done.
That was was it the Saratoga?
That was the Saratoga.
Saratoga, right?
Yeah, because there was 2 carriers there that dropped off at Wake that was headed to the South Pacific from Honolulu. Now, you couldn't see them. You couldn't see them, but you knew there's aircraft carriers out there, the type of planes that was flying over the island.
Oh, you mean the Japanese planes? Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you see? How long did our Wildcats last? And did you see them?
No, I
going
never
again?
did see them fighting or anything,
Uh-huh.
but I seen them take off and come back.
Yeah.
The last one got back, I guess, the day before the final hoorah.
Yeah.
Captain Freuler was the officer that flew it.
And I think Bob, you had mentioned that early on they knocked out like 8 of them on the ground. There were 4 left.
Well, let's put it this way. They knocked out 5 completely. There was one that was damaged, it couldn't fly, but they was able to salvage some parts off of it. Now, that's my memory on it, is what I was told.
Cannibalized it.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
let's talk about what led up to you seeing the Japanese and you're walking away. That final day, when do they come in? During the day or at night, or when do
Morning.
you see them
They
first?
come in the morning. And this, when I seen the Japs' skull and what have you, brains, that was after they had tied us up with the communication wires, then untied us and put us down in the ammunition or hospital.
Okay. Now, when they came to be hand to hand, and they're coming in, did you have a weapon, or were you supposed to fight against them?
Well,
What
I
were you
had a
supposed to
weapon
do?
all during the days, but when we left the gun to surrender, I threw it in the bomb crater in the water.
Okay. And
Took the boat out of it and threw it in the water.
how did you get the message to surrender, or how did that come about?
Well, all I know is the gun captain told us, the sergeant.
Okay. And could you see the Japanese at that time?
No.
So what, did you just wait there for them to come, or?
No, we walked out to the roadway and started, and here come Major Devereaux with a white flag down the road, and when his group got by, we just followed in behind. Now, there's Marines claims that we was walking down the way that the Japanese come down to where they were tying us up in one thing or another, telling the officer there that they were taking prisoners. How true that is or not, I don't know. That's what the Marines has told me.
They said what now?
The Japanese come running down the road telling the Japanese officer that they were taking prisoners.
But who was?
Japanese
were
was taking prisoners. Yeah. That the Japanese was taking prisoners. Evidently, the old admiral out on the boat on the island or on the sea was getting messages from Tokyo or headquarters. They was telling him to take passengers. But them turkeys that was there already on the island from all indications, they was setting up to not take prisoners, believe me.
They were gonna
Annihilate.
Oh, yeah,
shoot
hell yeah,
everybody or
because
kill everybody.
They had tied our arms up behind us and,
Oh, I see. So it looked like you
they'd
were-
stripped us of our clothes, all but our shoes and socks. And they had tied our hands behind us with the wire up around our neck. And I mean, they pulled these arms up, way up, so that you couldn't slack them because you'd choked yourself. Boy, is it miserable. And they plopped your bare ass down on that coral. And that coral's sharp.
How about that, now, the Marines on Wilkes, they didn't get the word real quick.
No.
Then they found, they were still fighting while you guys were.
Well, oh, definitely. They'd wiped out everyone but one Jap. And he remembered that there was a Marine with a big mustache. McKinstry was his name. He had a handlebar mustache. And he was running around in the barracks hunting a razor to get rid of that mustache. Yes, sir, he wanted to get rid of that mustache. I think he probably broke a window and got some glass to get rid of it. There was no razors.
So it looked as though they were perhaps going to execute you, but they must have gotten orders not to.
Well, I
and
think
then
so,
they untied you and
Because
whatever.
we had our backs to the sea, and in back of us a ways, they had a machine gun set up back there with the crew there and everything. And there was nothing between that machine gun and us guys over there on the road. And he could have just made one swipe and got the whole goddamn herd.
So now you're a prisoner, the
Yeah.
Japanese, and how long did you stay on the island before they took you somewhere else?
Well, I left there on the 12th of January, 1942, on the Nita Maru, in the forward hold, top deck.
And how many of you were on board?
I have no idea. I've never heard anybody say how many.
But
They
there were-
left about, I think 200 or 300 civilians on the island. Now, I'm not sure on that figure. I know there was around 100 that was left on the island in 43 when they shipped them out to Japan. They got done. They left about 300, I think, on the island.
Well, then Pan Am left all the Cameroons there.
Who?
The Cameroons, the Pan Am, the workers, the Cameroons, you know, the
No,
workers.
no, they stayed, they went with us to Japan.
Yeah, but I mean, they didn't take them, you know, put them on the Pan Am and fly them out.
Oh, no, 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 no. No, the Pan Am, they didn't even, the poor old carpenter for Pan Am, he was taking wounded Cameroons over to the hospital, or to get them attention. And the clipper went off without him.
So-
And the insurance man.
So where did that ship take you then?
Well, I was in Tokyo Bay on the 17th of January, 1942. We were there a couple of days, and then we went to Wusung, China.
Okay, you had those 3 executions aboard the ship when you, when was
Well,
that?
now, I
happen?
knew nothing about that
But you heard about it?
after I got home. What
Oh, okay.
After I got home. I heard nothing about that on the boat.
Okay, and so they took you to China. Whereabouts in China is that? Where was the camp in China they took you to?
Wusung.
Yeah, but where is that?
That's at the mouth of where the Wangpu empties into the Yangtze River.
How far inland from the coastal area would that be?
Well, the Wangpu empties into the Yangtze practically at the coast. There's nothing but water from there on out to Japan.
And when you got to that camp, was there prisoners that already there?
Nope, nope. There was nobody there but Chinamans building it. The Chinamans or Japanese soldiers building it. It wasn't even completed when we got there.
And what was the treatment like that you?
Oh, Buster, that in 1942, them people were riding high, and then too, you see, they had quite a chore on their hands when you come right down to it, after you get back and realize, down here, they had about 1,200 men or more, and they was having to change them into their customs. Japanese customs weren't our customs. And they had to be mean and ornery, because there was some awful mean and ornery men amongst us, as far as that's concerned. But they had a job to do, and they intended to do it, and they were riding high and winning and everything, and they meant business. They had, I look back on it now, I couldn't figure out why then, but now I can understand what their chore was. Trying to break us down, they wanted to break our morale down, for one thing. And the next thing was they wanted us to do what they wanted us to do. And of course we wasn't used to their food, and they could care less. That's all they were. Or there was.
And did they make you work then?
Oh, yes.
Which is probably,
Huh?
probably gave you something to do better than just sitting around not doing anything, I
Oh,
assume.
well, most of the fellows worked in the garden. I was a carpenter on Wake Island. I was a carpenter all of the time I was with the Japanese, until I got to Japan on the 2nd of July, 1945, until the end of the war.
Now, Bob was mentioning there's a movie called Empire of the Sun, and it depicts a P-51 coming over a camp.
Yeah.
And were you there, or did you see the P-51s coming in?
Oh, I seen P-51s, yes. And I seen a P-51 shoot a Japanese bomber belly down.
You did.
Oh yeah, they wasn't 500 foot off the ground.
Was that in China or in Japan?
No, that's in Kangwon. And I seen one P-51 shoot down a, what's these little single
Piper
engine?
Cub.
Like a
Huh?
Piper Cup.
Piper Cub. It took him 3 passes before he could get him. Oh yeah, he was just having a ball. And they weren't 500 foot off the ground, both of them.
And you were out working?
Well, I was
around?
out in the camp yard.
Yeah.
It all happened real quick. There was 3 bombers took off, no, 2. 2 bombers took off from the airport south of us. One of them ahead of the other one. Well, the first one, he got away. But the second one, those 3 51s was going towards the airport, and they seen this one Betty. And boy, they just looped right over just as pretty as you please, boy. The formation, boy, I mean, they looped right over and they got right behind one another. Right over our campus when 151 opened up on him. And the tail gunner was shooting at this 51 all the time. But this 51 just kept on going, and boy, he just touched the trigger. And the smoke started coming out of the bomber, and he just took off for the airport, and so the other 2 followed him. And then, of course, they was back and forth. And then this 151 seen that Piper Cub, and he had to knock in.
Now, were there military personnel in the camps
Oh,
besides
yeah.
you guys?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had several Marine Corps officers and USS President Harrison's crew and officers.
All Americans, or did they have any
No,
other
they
allies?
had different nationalities. Now the U.S., the HMS Petrel, British ship, the crew of that and their captain was in camp with us.
And was there a structure set up in the camp as far as someone in charge of, I mean, the prisoners? Did you have kind of an organized?
Oh yes, there was barracks for civilians, barracks for Marines, barracks for officers. And you had an adjutant, as they called him, who was top dog. Everybody's supposed to listen to him. And then, of course, each section It was 6 sections, there was a leader for each section of 36 men.
Anybody try to escape?
No, not that I know of. I walked in and out of the prison camp yard anytime during the day I wanted to from August of 43 on.
No place to go, though, I'm assuming. I mean,
Huh?
I said no place to go. I mean,
Well,
they could
that's
get
what
away
I
from it.
always figure. I wasn't quite as gutty as Taylor getting off that doc's car.
Were you in the same train?
Oh, yes, I remember. I don't remember the date or anything, but I remember the night he jumped off, him and his partner. And then again, we stopped on the way to Ping Tai when the officers jumped off.
Did they get away, these
Oh,
guys?
yeah, the officers got away.
Did they? And Taylor, they got away too, those guys?
Taylor made it, but his partner broke his leg and he got to stay.
That was Lopez, I think was his name.
Huh?
Lopez, they caught him, broke his leg.
Did you lose a lot of weight? Did you lose a lot of weight while you were in?
The lowest I got in 1943 was 138 pounds.
Did
You
they?
must've liked rice.
Oh, I like rice. I still do.
Well, they probably, if they wanted you to work for them, they probably wanted to keep you fairly healthy. so you
No,
could work.
no,
Do
they
you think,
just
or
had
not?
so many grams of rice for you. They
They
didn't
just had
care.
Yeah.
I don't know what they give their army. They were supposed to give us the same as what they give their army people, but I don't think they give us quite that many grams.
Were you ever concerned that they would just kill you all? I mean, that happened in some
Well,
other
you never
camps.
knew about that. You didn't want to worry too much about that because you just take it as it goes.
Did you know much what was going on the outside, how the war was progressing or anything like
Oh,
that?
well, you never knew exactly.
Did they have like radios in the camp or anything?
Well,
like
now,
that?
we had a radio in Kangwon, China, pretty near it all the time. And, but everything was always so distorted. We had a chief Navy man that was in the hospital. He's supposed to be crazy. And the summer of 44, he used to call people over to the wire fence and tell them that the States has got flying cruisers with 8-inch rifles. Yeah. What did we see on the Armistice Day 1944? The B-29 for the first time. Now, you figured.
Where were you when the atomic bomb was dropped?
Well, I was in Niigata. And-
Japan?
Huh?
Is that Japan? Where's that?
That's in Japan.
Yeah.
And if you look at the orders for the Air Force to drop the 4 bombs, there's 4 towns: Kokura, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and Niigata. So I've missed both atomic bombs that's been dropped.
You left out there, yeah.
It's just that the weather was in my favor, that the trailing plane of scientists could observe. Now that bomb that got to Nagasaki was been dropped on Kokura.
And so, do you remember when you first heard that the war was over?
Well, that wasn't for sure. For the guys, we knew there was something happened on the 15th because all the guys went to work. 15th was my day to stay in camp and wash my clothes. And so at noon or afternoon, here come, see, the emperor made his speech at noon. And the fellows that was working down at the waterfront from our camp said that all the Japanese down there that was around the radio, when the emperor was making his speech, they were standing at attention, rigid attention. And when he got done, the Japanese come out and told them they were Tomodachi's, friends. And they brought them home. They didn't work the afternoon. They come back out to the barracks. Now that's what I knew what was going on. That's all.
And when were you liberated?
September 6th. But you see, in a couple of days, Wednesday, now that was Sunday that he made his speech, I believe. Well, now Wednesday night, I and a group of fellas got together and we went downtown, Nogales. And I don't know, we walked a long, long ways. Well, stayed out in the middle of the street, and there's very few street lights. There wasn't much light in town. There wasn't no moon or anything. And I don't know, we walked and we walked and we walked. I think they had at least a 60-watt light globe hanging in the middle of the street at an intersection. It wasn't more than a 60, I'm sure. And we got down there to one of those, and we decided, it was kind of hilly, we decided, well, we better go back to the barracks. So we started back, and we was going down the hill, I got thirsty. I lost my head too, because I went up tremendous wide steps to a hotel, which is a dim light in the lobby. I went up there, and I was wanting to drink water. I was thirsty. So I went up there, and they had one of these little silver bells that you tap. Well, that was all alone out there on the desk, and I tapped it, and here come a young lady in a white dress. And so she bowed, I bowed, and I asked her for a glass of water, Mizu. And she left. She come back with a glass of water. I drank it, I set it on the counter. I arigato, bowed, she went to the back, and I went out the front. And we stopped in a barber shop coming up that night. There's all men in there. Oh, it was crowded. We crowded in there too. And we was talking. They speak a little English, we speak a little Japanese. We talked. We knew the war was over. Hirohito told them, suffer the insufferable. They did. Now them people, he was a god. I mean a god. Because not all Japanese obeyed him, but I got news for you, Buster. There was so many of them, those that didn't want to, they didn't have no choice. That when he said, it's just like you turn a water faucet off. It's unbelievable. It's hard to understand. And if you didn't see it, it'd still be harder to understand. But that's just what happened.
So then, in September, did the American Army come in, or how did what happened?
No. The only military people we seen was Admiral Stassen, the ex-governor of Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
Him and a few of his crewmen had landed over at the airport. They come over to the camp. I've got some pictures someplace of them. And that's all the military I ever seen.
Did they fly you out of there, or how did you get home?
No, we went. Japanese took us out by passenger train to Tokyo. Night of September 5th. They took half of them the night of September 4th. They took half of them. September 5th, they took the half I was with. And when I was one of the last ones out of the camp, took them by bus down to the depot, or wherever the damn train was on the siding. And the bus driver had the bus headed out. And me and the music, he was a Marine with a bugle, and the bus driver. And so we went to the barracks a-hollered, be sure we get everybody. There happened to be in the Filipino Army deck, or Army barracks, way back in the back corner under a bunch of blankets, we heard a grunt. And there was a soldier back there, he was so looped, and we should have just left him is what we should have done. But we horsed him into the bus. And then before I got aboard, and then before the music got aboard, he played taps. Then he got aboard, and we told the bus driver to take us away.
then how did you get back to the States?
Well, now I tell you, I come back first class on that. I tell you, that I was the most luckiest man in the world. I waited out on the docks at Oklahoma. I got down there about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had my guitar, and I had a bag on my back. And I walked around trying to find somebody to talk to. I was in no hurry to go no place. I had food, and there's plenty of food around. And I was in no hurry to get home. Everybody else